Fine, so now you're live. Now you're live. Well, click on that arrow at the bottom. So let's move this up.
And that you log that onto the group by that.
Yeah, so if you go onto that group now,
Yeah.
go onto that group and click on that link, you should be able to watch. Just click on that link.
So the only thing was, so when you log into the WhatsApp, how do you then get that to the group? We just go to that. So the groups, these are all your. How would you get that synced? How do you get that synced to my
Because you scan it. So this is basically like what your. This is just a web version of what's on it's kind of like you've got Messenger for Facebook.
How does the computer though? Because you're scanning the QR.
Yeah, so it's a way of authenticating. Right? So you basically log into your WhatsApp based on that code that you scanned in. Oh yeah, they can only see what's on that. Don't worry. Don't worry. So yeah, so you now see this shows that one person's watching.
You sent this to the other.
Yeah, so it's on that group. So now, yeah, so Selena's been added to it. Anyone who said that they might want to come onto it has been added to it.
But you're limiting it to one person per site.
No, as many people can choose if they want to.
I thought the full messaging was just going forward. So how many people are logged in?
Right now, I'm zero. Selena and Adrian, what's going to be. So, so these are people who have used it in the past. Game mode. You want to sit there, you might be a bit restricted, because that's where the streaming can go. But we can do it from there.
What screen? Oh, your webcam.
Yeah.
Again, who's monitoring the dungeon?
Mate, if you want to loan it out, I'm happy to let you have it.
Yeah, so we start with the MCQ. So Andy, I think said as well, just to get some MCQs to you guys. Should we do them now?
And then when people have come, we'll start making talk.
So I might mention you before in the RPs, some fantastic consultants. Upper limb trauma is quite a broad topic. That was the topic I was given today. So what I've done is I've ignored the ligaments stuff that you covered last term. I'm not going to do elbows because we did that to death on firework night. So I was just going to cover clavicles and proximal humerus is probably the key stuff, and I was going to cover a bit of scapula and humerus if you've actually got the inclination by the time we've covered all that stuff. Does that sound about right? Cool. MCQs. The little post-it notes, by the way, are not for the MCQs. They're for the place-based discussion bits I'm going to do. So, cool. Let's start off with one then.
That's exactly that.
So I'm just going to get to
It looks fantastic.
You said no because he went to us.
Yeah, Extremely happy.
Really? How long do you want for these, each one?
Well, what we did previously was pick someone, they answer it.
So the plan is, I think one.
We've got all.
Were you going to go through them now, just answer them now, and then go through them later on, or?
Yeah, I was just going to do it like an exam. So just have a look.
So write down.
Yeah,
your
write down the
answers,
answers.
and then
Write down what
one
you've got. Yeah, write down what you've got. We'll do it like an exam thing. So this will be, I don't know, it's 10 questions or something, isn't it? 14. Okay, so you've got, I'm going to give you 30 seconds per question.
Better questions, actually.
Next one.
This is the key. We'll try to sign out. So as you go, just lock it up and just give them the key.
Is this too quick? The way we did this last time was using those remote control things to answer it. That's quite good.
Feedback, jeez.
Someone's a bit touchy here.
So where do they come from?
They come from there.
Here, yeah.
Do they?
Yeah.
Some people just couldn't be asked.
Okay, the next one. Things that think.
It is a stuff you can't announce to organise because you've got to link the program.
Exactly. And then you actually get that much out of the
I don't know, when I did the questions, I certainly did all of those, so that's all of our questions really.
The other one.
There's one you can do on the phone.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying.
Much.
Which is a good section.
Also,
Did you just go back?
Yeah. Yeah, right down the answer. Please move on.
mhm.
pushing the 70 cubes in the biomechanics lecture one as well. We did really understand. Did you have teaching last week? Was it snowed off?
No, it's no doubt.
Yeah. That's what we can do today.
That's a very fair point.
I'll show you the X-ray and then I'll go back.
So you can.
Cool, I think that's all the MCQs actually.
Too much snow for that. Yeah, we only had like 1 month. Lots of snow.
Cool, okay, so first, what was that? So what's the answer here? What did you guys have for first question?
Thought maybe a transfer, but probably if deltoid's not working, then shoulder arthrodesis.
So he's got, so there's always some kind of element of, there's something relevant in the stem. They don't tell you anything for nothing. So this guy's got paralysis of his deltoid and his rotator cuff, and he's 5 years post-injury. So there is no hope of recovery at all. So his reconstructive options for his shoulder aren't going to be a reverse because he's got no deltoid, and they're not going to be any form of anatomic shoulder replacement. So you've got no salvage arthroplasty options for his shoulder, but he has got a functional hand, so he needs to be able to position it in space. So out of those, this is one of those relatively, I better check I've got the answer right, but this is one of those indications for shoulder arthrodesis. Yeah, because you've got someone who's young and who hasn't got any shoulder function, and they've got distal benefit. Yeah, okay, and the arthrodesis, this thing about position and where you're meant to position it, depends on which book you look in, but basically it's sort of slightly out to the side, slightly forward, and slightly internally rotated, so the arm's not sticking out, you can do always kind of thing. And you can use your scapulothoracic movement to move it. Yeah, so the MRI. So what does the MRI show? Does anyone want to talk me through this one? There's two things that are shown on this MRI.
The heel stacks and a Bankart.
Yeah, it's still stacks in the Bankart. Yeah. So the question is what are the most likely things you can see? Well, rotator cuff tears, they're quite unusual in an acute sensitivity situation. They do happen in contact athletes with repetitive dislocations. Slap tear, possibly, but it's less likely. So by far and away, the commonest thing you're going to see is that there's a Bankart lesion. Glenoid fracture, possibly, but that isn't what's shown on the imaging, and humeral avulsion. They haven't mentioned the heel sac, so the only option is a Bankart lesion. That's the only one thing that's listed in the two lesions that are shown on the MRI. Yeah. Okay. So which of the following factors increase the risk of non-union in the midshelf? So sling mobilization, does that increase it? So it doesn't matter what you immobilize it in, there's no proven evidence that it improves or deleteriously affects the outcome. Displacement comminution? Yeah, well, according to those papers that we sent out, yeah, absolutely. Age less than 40 years old, no, that's a good prognostic indicator. So the older you are, am I the only ones over 40 here? Okay, so you guys are all living the dream of your clavicle fractures, and I'm starting to decay. Immediate range of motion exercise, same answer as the first one, and male. Actually, there's preponderance for female, non-unions and females. So, so yeah, the answer is displacement comminution. Yeah. Very nice. Okay, so what does the lateral pivot shift test? Which ligament does it test? Or what kind of instability does it test? Does anyone know?
Lateral rotation.
Yeah, posterolateral rotary instability. And so what's the main lesion in that?
Lateral and collateral.
Yeah, lateral and collateral ligament. So out of two pictures, it's the one that's going to be looking at the lateral side, and then gives you a 50-50 chance of being right. And D is the annular ligament, and C is the lateral and collateral ligament. It sits like a little hammock behind the radial head, helping prevent posterior displacement. So the answer on that is C. Yeah. Triceps ruptures. So this could be the same question for TAs as well, tendon Achilles ruptures, or pec major ruptures, or any of those kind of injuries. So which one isn't it? Which one isn't it associated with? Yeah, basically. At least it might be for the type B error, so it's not directly related to it. In fact, they may be on the creatine, neither here nor there, but yeah. Yeah, so fluoroquinine, so things like ciprofloxacin use, renal osteodystrophy, local corticosteroid use, anabolic steroid use, all associated with tendon ruptures. What's the answer here? This one is MCQ STEM questions. Epileptic?
Yeah, no. Are they epileptic or not? No.
Got split decision. So Marfan's, you get instability in any plane, but generally speaking, it's still in the same plane. So it can also be inferior as well. Epilepsy. So classically, it's about 97%, 98% of dislocations tend to be anterior, but in epilepsy, it's 50-50, so got to go out front or the back. It's the highest rate of posterior dislocation happens in epileptic patients, but for an epileptic patient, it's still a 50-50 chance whether they go out front or back. Does that make sense? Am I with me on that? So it's the highest rate of posterior dislocation happen in epileptics, but in Marfan's, it can go in any direction. Football players. Yeah. That's quite a long stem to read, isn't it? Okay, so basically someone's kicking him about the side and he's got a winged scapula. So what's the pathology there? Yeah. So the reason they like MCQ questions like this is because you have to think, okay, so what's being kicked, what nerve does it innervate, and then you've got to identify which is on the surface anatomy or on the anatomy that they show, which is the anatomy involved. So which one is it? D. Yeah. So this guy's basically got medial scapular weave, trapezius is still innervated, and so it's pulling it medially. Makes sense? Okay, good. So what's the answer to this one? The phone smart, what is the artery for? Just answer the question. Yeah. What is artery for?
Never remember.
So when I was doing the exam, the answer would have been the anterior circumflex, because that was the one that generally was thought to affect giving your head blood supply. But more recently, there's been some evidence that shows it's more likely to be posterior circumflex. Most of the blood supply comes in posterior. And I mean, basically, it's the big circumflex one. So it can be the anterior or the posterior one. It's like an analysis test, isn't it? So the answer remains false, just whether you put the posterior or the anterior one. Okay, good.
Was there a reason why they used to think it was more anterior?
Traditionally, I don't know the answer for that, but I think it's because that's the one that we come across whenever we're actually doing the operating, and it's a reasonably big vessel. But it was this piece of research that suggested that maybe the posterior is more significant, and we'll cover some of the papers that look at fracture morphology and the things that are disrupted, and the fact that they showed intraoperatively there was some disruption to the blood supply, but it had less of an effect on AVM later. So the issue was really that anterior circumflex is often disrupted, and yet 80% of the time they weren't getting osteonecrosis. So the presumption therefore is that the posterior circumflex is also important. Yeah, okay. So what does the X-ray show here? All happy? It's not classic light bulb, is it? So it's supposed to, so what's the answer on this? Yeah, auxiliary views. Yeah. Yeah, and the figure that's given is that 50% of posterior dissipations are still missed. Okay. So what's the lesion that's shown in the MRI? So something happening in the anterior capsule. There's quite a lot of extravasation of fluid. If this is an acute injury, that would be fluid or blood rather than contrast necessarily. And the labrum doesn't look normal anteriorly. And there's also some bone bruising in the region of the hill sacs. So there's an anterior dislocation. So position of instability, abduction, and external rotation. Yeah. And so, it's which of the following statements regarding rotator cuff repair is true. So the first one's everything that you read in any anchor magazine about why it's such a good anchor. Okay? But like reality is we don't have any evidence of that. Double row, single row, still no obvious clinical benefit to that, although biomechanically a suggestion looks better. The key thing really is that if the rotator cuff doesn't heal, then your outcome is less good. So that's from the Seesaw study. Controversial.
Oh. It'll be removed from the MCQ question.
So is this an out-of-date one then?
Isn't that just referring to the fact that you're drilling it supposed
Okay, so apparently I
So how is
It's just American, they're pro intervention and they'll take a case series of like 9 patients to prove it.
So there's animal studies that show that you've got bone growing in and you've got vascularity from the bones. So what? Whereas if you do failure to heal the rotator cuff tendon, it does consistently result. I guess actually what it's saying there is that it results in a poor outcome. The outcome's not as good, but it is still nonetheless better than if you don't do repair at all. So I guess that's where it's getting that from. Okay. Right.
They wouldn't have considered you up as part of that.
Yeah, they probably haven't. Yeah. Sorry, you not Seesaw. Yeah. So what's this about? What's the actual stem telling you?
less tuberosity, osteotomy for access?
Yeah.
You need to heal it to no passage.
Or may not have an osteotomy, it may have already been fractured. But there would have been some kind of subscapular repair basically as part of this. So you will do pendulums. You may well do some active-assisted internal range. Forearm supination is fine. That's going to be your bicep predominantly. Passive external rotation past 30 degrees, you're going to stress the repair. Passive internal rotation is absolutely fine. Yeah. Nearly there, nearly finished. Okay, so what's this trying to tell us? Basically, there's a scapular fracture. So let's go back to the question. So it's really about indications for scapular fracture. It's an extra-articular fracture. There's nothing actually involved in the scapular blade itself. So you're not going to be wading in to go and do something for it. So it's really a question of how long you immobilize it for. And whether you immobilize it for 8 weeks or you immobilize it for 2 weeks. Yeah, and the longer you immobilize it, the stiffer it's going to get. So the answer is 2 weeks of immobilization. And it's not the ultra stems. And finally, this is about risk from distal interlocks. So which way are the locking bolts going in this? Yeah, AP. So which nerves at risk?
Anterior interosseous.
Anterior interosseous at this level?
No.
Must be musculocutaneous. Do you want to see me and raise me another nerve? Yeah, musculocutaneous. So AP locking bolts, musculocutaneous. What about lateral locking bolts? Yeah, radial. Yeah. So, but if you do them in the open, you'll see it. So AP locking bolts, not really a big risk, but there is with the lateral ones. They can be quite easy to get a radial. Good. Okay. Yeah, musculocutaneous. Cool. Okay, let's finish up there. Okay, so look, the purpose of this session really is to go through some stuff that's going to be useful to you guys. There's a massive amount to cover. So as I was saying to the other guys earlier, I think the key topics really, given that we've done elbows to death, we've done the ligaments stuff last time, is going to be clavicle and proximal humerus. But I've thrown some extra stuff in there if we've got time, if you guys aren't completely exhausted. So I'm happy to sort of do less, but dwell on topics a bit more, or try and cover the whole thing. It's really up to you. There's a little bit of didactic stuff in it, but the key thing really is decision making and doing some of the case-based discussion stuff. So I'm going to try and spend more time on that. So the good news is you're going to be probably not going to be wrong in most of your answers with upper limb, because the decision making is kind of clear as mud about a lot of the upper limb fracture management. So for those of you who are working around region and have worked in a number of hospitals, you'll see clavicle fractures being managed one way by one surgeon and one way by another, same for proximal humeral fractures. There's quite a lot of variety, and hopefully I can sort of shed some light on some of the decision-making process that's common to all of us, and then it kind of comes to personality as to what you place more emphasis on. I think the literature is quite confusing about it, and the two papers that you guys got sent out this week, one of the things for the exam is you do need to know a little bit of evidence behind stuff, and what's really good is if you know evidence that's come from centres where you work. So both the PROFA study has three surgeons from regions names on it, and the clavicle study does as well. So if you're a Bristol or Severn trainee, then it helps you to know some of the literature that comes from where you work. There'll be a sort of anticipation of that. So what I'm going to do is with each of the topics, I'm going to cover the anatomy, because sphere of surgery is sphere of anatomy. Classifications, really, hands up the last time any of you classified a clavicle fracture. Yeah, so me too. And but there are some classifications, and I guess you just need to have a sense of them. You need to be aware of them, because sometimes classifications are just about getting their name on stuff, and sometimes they actually do bear relevance. And there are a few things that you need to appreciate, some differences you need to appreciate between some of the different fracture types. Treatment considerations, what are your options? And really, when it comes to the exam and when it comes to real life, it's about, okay, well, I've got the patient in front of me, what am I actually going to do with it? Okay. And then finally, kind of what are the operative steps? Now, if we haven't got time, I'm going to skip over those bits. So these are really kind of what are the tips and tricks about doing the operations. And I suspect we're probably not going to have enough time for that, but anyway, we'll see. The key ones among you can ask me that over a pint. So, you all can stand in silence. This is post-it note time. So, green post-it notes. I want you to write down, pertaining to X-ray A, what the key features are of this injury that can decide your management. So I repeat that. So just like single words, I don't want essays, I can't read an essay. I just want single word answers as to what you think the key features about this X-ray are that are going to guide your management. This on the green post-it notes. And have any of you not got post-it notes? Really feeling left out. We'll need pink ones too. Mr. Dackham, can I get you to collect? Can I get you to collect the green post-it notes? Yeah, and it took about 30 seconds or so. So they were a bit, but basically, what are the key features that are going to guide your management of this. And then for those of you who have been really efficient, guess what? Same question, but for B. Okay, so what are the key features that are going to guide your management about this?
Well, you still agree.
No, no. So for the B, on the pink
Sorry.
same question, but a different X-ray. So on the green ones, what are the key management decisions? What are the key factors that are going to affect your management? For B, on the pink post-it notes, same question. What are the key things on this that are going to guide your management?
Is that just factors on the X-ray or factors in general?
The injury. Pertains to the injury, not just the X-ray. The X-ray gives you the diagnosis, but what are going to be the key things that are going to guide your management? Do you want to go with the green ones? This is partly me just trying to work out what you guys think. Now, I'm going to ask a really bad question. I'm not going to get any answers from it, or I'm going to get a consensus as to what you think is important about making decisions. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Start a little campfire here at the front of the auditorium. Yeah, actually, ready for the gather things up on the other side. That'd be brilliant.
Yeah, it doesn't come through.
My next question is, are these different injuries? Do they behave differently? You don't have to write this down. Different or the same? Different? Okay, so you're going to vote with your hands. So if you think that basically there's pretty much the same kind of injury, hands up. Okay, so same question. If you think there's a different kinds of injuries, hands up. I'm going to follow the herd. Okay. Okay, you're all pretty much saying the same thing actually about what you think is important here. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, all right. So we'll carry on. I'm not going to give you the answer to that just yet, because hopefully that's what the talk will do. I just want you to be thinking about these and thinking about how you're interpreting these X-rays, because these are important. This is what you're dealing with every day. So I promised you a classification system, and I've given you 4. Okay, so Alman is the kind of common one, and it deviates a little bit from your standard classification. Those you get because normally it's A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3 working from one side to the other. But Alman doesn't do that. Alman groups the number 1 in the middle, number 2, and it's basically it groups it by how common these injuries occur. Okay, and because we love thirds, guess what? It's been divided to thirds. Robinson, you read one of his papers hopefully this week. He's the Edinburgh guy, writes loads about shoulder trauma. He was kind of a bit more pragmatic, and so basically you take the lateral fifth or the medial fifth, and you get the kind of 3/5 in the middle, which is probably more accurate to how we manage these cases and what we do with them. The importance about these, though, is that these fractures behave differently according to which bit of the clavicle they occur. And that's really the purpose of the classification systems. And for the exam, you don't generally get asked classifications, but if you can come up with one that's actually relevant and going to make a difference to your decision making, then that's poignant. We generally talk about these as being kind of middle third or lateral third or possibly medial third injury setting. I mean, we describe where they are. That's really the key bit of it. So the name of the classification is irrelevant, but there are some important subtypes in the lateral clavicle fractures that you just need to know about. So that's the Alman classification and its frequency. But really, the key thing comes down to anatomy. Okay, so the central part of the clavicle is really about being a strut for your shoulder, and it doesn't really have any particularly interesting anatomy attached to it. And if you get it vaguely straight, it's usually going to heal. Okay, so it's the stuff that we see day in, day out. The lateral clavicle gets a little bit more interesting because there's a whole bunch of ligaments and things happening. And so you get these combined ligamentous and bony injuries. And also the forces that are being translated across that area are slightly different. It's also metaphyseal bone, so it's not quite strong. It's not strong cortical bone. And then medially, clearly, you've got all the problems of the kind of sternoclavicular joints and the clotwork that's around there. So these injuries are important to differentiate. I'm going to quickly talk about sternoclavicular joint injuries because they're kind of rare. We covered it in the biomechanics section, and we talked about ligamentous injuries. They're really rare, 5% is what they quote. So that means we should be seeing 1 in 20 of our clavicle fractures. I think it's less than that in my own practice. I think I probably see kind of 1 every 6 months, maybe. It may be that they're not being diagnosed. That may be part of it. Types. So whether it's pure ligamentous or whether there's fracture dislocation. However, there is something important, and I guess it potentially is an exam question. So the last physis in the body to fuse is your medial clavicle physis between 20 and 25. So you can get in late adolescence, early adulthood, you can get injuries which actually can be physeal injuries, and if you pop them back into position, they will normally heal. So you can mistake a fracture for a physeal injury. And the other question that comes up in the exam is X-ray views, and it's the serendipity view. Okay. Treatment of them by far and away is going to be conservative for these, unless they've got a vascular compromise, in which case you're going to get some way of cardiothoracic support, and you're going to try and get it reduced and back into a decent position. There's very little bony real estate there. So trying to fix these is a miserable endeavour and also fraught with danger because of where you actually are. So the advice generally is that you need to have some kind of cardiothoracic backup. Have any of you done any of these fixations? Yeah, James, when was that? Was that here?
No, with Phil Camp in
With cardiothoracics.
cardiothoracics.
Very good. So what was the case?
Guy who basically had a medial fracture, which came back and was
Gone posteriorly.
Yeah, and it was in between his carotid.
So he had vascular compromise.
And his subclavian.
Okay. I'm going to show you in a second. So yeah, the types are, is it anterior, is it posterior? Posterior is the one where there's potential vascular compromise. And we had one of ours in Bath, and they may ask you about the reduction manoeuvre for that. So classically, you put the shoulders over a bolster, push back, you get a towel clip and try and pull forward. You put the towel clip just over the skin, around the clavicle, try and yank it forward. It works, and I did it in Bath, thank goodness. So that's the serendipity view. So it's a 40-degree Kepler-Dane view. I don't think I can get too much trust. The gold standard really is CT now, and probably CT angio, because you can actually see where the vessels are. If it's compromised, it's gone posteriorly. But serendipity view may well be an MCQ question. That's all I've got to say about sternoclavicular joint injuries. They're not common, and generally you talk to your shoulder specialist about them and get them transferred out of its vascular compromise. But they are fair game for the MCQ questions. So the next thing I was going to focus on are these, which is the lateral clavicle fractures. And let's have a look what you guys have written about them. Yeah, distal third, function. Think about cuff tears with them. Not specifically, actually. I mean, you can get any associated injuries around. They happen in different population groups. So your mid-shaft tend to happen in your young patients, and then to a lesser extent in the elderly. There's that bimodal distribution, but the vast majority are in the younger age group. Okay, whereas the elderly get to have more of a tendency to get these lateral clavicle fractures. You'll see them in the young as well, of course, but there's a bit more of a distribution towards elderly women. And it's important because you've got this ligamentous and bony injury involved. So this is the sub-classification of the Alden classification with the different, this is NIRS adjustments to them. Okay. Now I'm not suggesting that you learn this. That one at the top, type 1, that's what you often tend to see in elderly who've fallen onto their side, and literally they just shove their clavicle underneath the lateral part of the clavicle, and they're usually stable injuries. But the important thing is this. So with the type 2s, where basically you've got it either the fracture's right adjacent to the ligaments, or actually involves one or both of the ligaments, the non-union rate goes up quite high. Okay, so the overall non-union rate is said to be about 30% for lateral clavicle fractures. So it's got a higher non-union rate compared to mid-shaft. That said, probably only about a third of those are actually symptomatic with it. But it's got, anyway, that's used as justification for intervention in various parts of the world. But there's a higher rate of non-union. So you need to just recognise these so that you can appreciate whether it's going to push you slightly more towards an operative intervention or not. And the type 5 is effectively when you've just invulsed the ligamentous attachment. Has anyone got any questions about that? That can make sense. So your that fracture that you had before, it's type 2. Okay, so both ligaments have got. So what are your options? How are you going to manage this? What things have you guys seen? Have you seen it managed? Hook plates?
Lateral clavicle.
Lateral clavicle plate on its own or augmented?
Augmented.
Augmented. So they used to use radial plates for it. Augmented with an endo button or some kind of flexible repair. Any other forms? Tightrope. Cool. So there's pros and cons of each of those. As soon as you go through the coracoid, you're violating it in some shape or form. And this is one of those situations, and we'll talk about it a bit more with proximal humerus, but you choose which cup of poison you want, basically. So if you put a hook plate in, the only thing you're going to violate is effectively the clavicle, but it's almost 100% metalwork removal, so you can demo them to another operation. They do get plate irritation, they've got slightly higher rates of shoulder irritation and frozen shoulder from it. And the other issue is that if you choose your patients badly, so over 60s, normally osteoporotic women, they can fracture the medial clavicle, and they can also fracture the acromion. And if you don't put the hook underneath the acromion, it can slip out if you don't put it under properly. But you don't burn many bridges if you choose the right patient for it, but you do have to have another operation. If you put a clavicle plate with augmentation in it, then effectively you don't have some of those risks. You've still got the plate irritation, and about a third of those need to come out anyway. But you are having to drill through the coracoid, so if you've got someone who's going to fall over, and then they could potentially next time fracture medial to the plate and potentially fracture through the coracoid as well. It's a risk factor. And then I haven't got a picture of an end, that does actually have an endobutton, it doesn't project very well. Or you can use the endobutton on its own, that's probably got the lowest reoperation rates. But again, you need to choose your patient correctly for these. So each of them's got a kind of risk-benefit profile. There is no right or wrong. You can choose whichever one you want. Okay, it just depends on what your predilection is. You're looking for complexity.
I was just working out in my mind when you did the tightrope, if you're doing it with the plate.
What?
Seemed like the sequence.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you normally would do you normally put the plate in situ and try and clamp it down, and then you put the tightrope through the plate. Most of the plates have got a little button hole on them so that you can do it.
You expose the coracoid before you put the plate on.
Yeah. So for reduction, you probably want to put the tightrope on first. But the problem is the plates then sit on top of the fret rail on top of the button.
Yeah, that's what.
So normally if you're putting a plate on, you put the plate on first, try and get it approximate. You may not put your lateral screws in, so you may put your position the plate, put the medial screws in, and then cinch it down. But the benefit, what's different from this from an AC joint when you've just got a ligamentous injury is if you use a tightrope for this, the tightrope's only got to work long enough for the bone to heal. Once the bone's healed, then you've kind of done the job already, because one part of the fragment's still got its normal ligamentous attachments. Does that make sense? So actually, it's not a bad idea. This is probably a relatively good indication if you've got someone with decent quality bone. As soon as the bone quality is poor, putting something in the coracoid, in my opinion, is a bad idea. But I'm sure you've all seen different opinions to that.
Is there any difference in terms of union? Because obviously the tightrope you don't control all the...
No, the union rates are all equivalent. It's just whether or not you have to reoperate it and plate irritation. I haven't seen anything that convincingly shows a difference. So you can choose what you want. You just choose which cup of poison you want, basically. You're choosing a complication profile and you're choosing a reoperation rate. So, right, clavicle fractures. So you guys treat these all the time. I mean, this is really common stuff, isn't it? How do you manage the non-operative? What do you advise?
Obviously, if it comes from mobile disabled, come back to clinic in 2 weeks.
You guys using slings?
Yeah,
Anyone using anything else? Anyone know of anything else?
just figure of 8 bandage.
Figure 8 bandages. Does anyone? How many of you have broken a collarbone? That's really surprising. Okay. Fine. I thought we loads more than that. Yeah. So, Andy, what did you try? What did you use?
I brought down sling for a week or so, and then just kind of mobilise.
And then just get it going. Okay. So, the vast majority of these can be managed in a sling. There's a figure of 8 bandage that's worth knowing about. Studies haven't shown any improvement between the two. Anecdotally, when I was a trauma fellow in Oxford, one of our very senior surgeons didn't want anyone to operate on his clavicle fracture. It was absolute agony. He was really struggling, around about 10 days. And then he just tried a figure of 8 bandage and his world became better. And for me, the cyclists who we get in, who are desperate to have an operation, they're really uncomfortable in about 10 days. I normally trial them on a figure of 8. You can use the waist strap on the poly slings that we use, and you can rig that up to what works a figure of 8. Show them how to put it on, and anecdotally that seems to help them, but the evidence doesn't support that. That's purely just my bias. But it can be helpful in people who are struggling with slings. But yeah, no benefit. The idea of the figure of 8 is that it kind of helps reduce the fracture, gets it back into a more normal position. The real question is really, why have we gone through this whole cycle of not operating on them, then operating on loads, and then operating on slightly fewer again? And the reasons are kind of various, but the old series that showed that pretty much all clavicle fractures healed had a bit of a sway towards being low energy injuries, because the people who had polytraumas, the really high velocity injuries who had clavicle fractures, probably weren't surviving, or were so bad because of their other injuries that the clavicle fracture was the least of their problem. Whereas now people are surviving high velocity trauma better, and we probably have more people riding motorbikes and bicycles and all those kind of things. So incidence of high velocity clavicle fractures going up, that's probably why non-union rates have gone up in more recent series looking at them. So that's kind of the first point. The second point is that it depends on which study you look at, but for all comers, the overall non-union rate is about 4.5%, thereabouts. Okay? But for the displaced, that goes up. I've given you 14.5%. I mean, I think the clavicle study that I gave you at 1 year, wasn't the rate 17.5 or something like that, 17 to 18%? So there are certain subgroup who definitely have a higher rate of non-union. And there's also this argument about whether malunion is symptomatic or not. Talk to Ian Packham, he's got a couple of patients who definitely had symptomatic malunions, who he's gone on and operated on. I've got maybe 1 or 2 I think might be symptomatic, but Mike McKee was the guy who published on this, and he gave a rate of 8.5% symptomatic malunions. So there are a population group who haven't quite united or have united in the wrong position and they end up symptomatic, and that's really where this whole discussion about whether we should be fixing this come from. These are the risk factors for not knitting. So this is potential MCQ fodder, but this is the kind of stuff that you might think about in clinic. So displacement combination, that's the really big one. What did it say in the paper? How displaced is displaced?
100% displacement is 2 centimeters short.
100%, 2 centimeters, some people say 1.5. Yeah, okay, but basically 2 centimeters displacement, over 100% translation. Age, increasing non-union with age, female sex in particular risk factor. Smoking is a really, the odds ratio is 3.8 if you're a smoker. If you're a significant smoker, more than 10, 15 a day, I guess 20 a day, and the odds ratio goes up, and the location. So just what we've been talking about, the difference between mid-shaft and lateral clavicle fractures. So your position and those factors impact on whether or not you're going to unite.
Do you let smoking sway your decision making? Because that would, the influence in that is then you should operate more on smokers than on non-smokers.
pull anything up?
Yeah, so it's a good question. This comes down to your philosophy about whether you're paternalistic to people or not. Everybody I see gets smoking cessation advice, and we've just had an email around from our chief exec saying there are smoking cessation clinics happening and available. So I mean, what's the one thing, if someone's trying to persuade me to do an operation on them, what's the one thing they can do that reduces their risk of non-union? Stopping smoking. But the question is, when does stopping smoking make a difference? I don't know the answer to that question. Does anyone? I mean, if they stop smoking on the day they see you, will that improve their risk of non-union? Possibly, but on a spectrum. And if they reduce this vaping any better? Honestly, who knows? But when you're getting to someone who's 6 months or a year down the line and they've got a non-union, I think it's reasonable to ask them to stop smoking. Someone's got an acute injury and they're a smoker, I'm going to ask them, I'm going to suggest that they stop. I give them that information, they can do with it what they will. But it wouldn't necessarily stop me, but it is something that they could do which would help themselves. You see what I mean? If I give you a really good politician's answer that hasn't answered it. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's important. That's important stuff to remember. So if you do go on and fix these, what are the benefits of it? Well, it was covered in the paper, isn't it? Potentially you get back early to work. There's been a bit of conflicting evidence between different papers on that, but generally speaking, people put it this way, that if you stop them from getting their non-union, i.e. the non-union that they had at 6 months or at 1 year that they wouldn't have had if you'd operated on them, they can get back to work soon. Does that make sense? They do a manual job if they're manually employed. There is still a non-union rate from the published series, but it's low. And again, women get the bad end of the deal, and then you will be significant medical comorbidities. So there is a non-union rate among those who we fix, and that kind of makes sense. We know that from when we fix other fractures. But 30% implant removal rate. Now, if you're using a very slim modern implant, they'll tell you they've got lower plate irritation rates. There's some evidence that superior plates have more irritation than the anterior or anterior superior plates. There's a neurovascular injury rate, there's an infection rate, there's a pneumothorax rate, and most importantly, there is a death rate. So there was a well-publicised death in Western Australia, a guy called Darryl Smith, who was a young, fit guy, pretty straightforward clavicle fracture, died on the table from the subclavian being caught by the Bristow. So that's a bad day at the office when someone who's young and fit and otherwise well with a clavicle fracture, but they probably would be united, dies. So there has been quite a lot of reflection about that among shoulder surgeons, because we are capable with the soft cuddly side of orthopedics, we think about things. So I'm going to talk to you about that, because there was some important stuff at BESS this year about that inquest and some of the outcomes of that. So that's just important stuff for you to know. So you decide you're going to do your operation. There's 2 different approaches. Now that may be a revelation to some of you, because most of you probably just hack straight down into the clavicle. So how many of you actually done any other approach apart from going direct down onto the clavicle? Okay, 3 of you, 4 of you. Okay, fine. You definitely have, because we did one together. So the classic is just, someone who's a jobbing orthopod, looks at a clavicle, it's broken, you just make a cut over the clavicle. You almost hold the knife like this, then you just tap it down over the top of it. Unzip it, it's an easy operation. It's like an AO Sawbones workshop. So there is a higher rate of infection if you do that. There is some evidence that you get lower rates of plate irritation if you go infraclavicular. So I tend to go infraclavicular. If you look on the AO surgery reference, it will show the 2 approaches, and then in the cross section it will show exactly the same approach. But basically, you go infraclavicular, you go down through skin, down through platysma, onto clavicular fascia, and then you work up on top of the clavicle and then make a separate incision directly down on top of it. And it gives you 2 zones of closure. The evidence isn't strong supporting one or the other, but just be aware there are two approaches. And if you see a scar, inferior as well. Okay. So shoulder surgeon's choice is inferior. There we are. I'm not worried about being inferior. So these are the conclusions of the Darryl Smith inquest. You need to have particular cautions with the more medial fractures. That's mid-shaft, but more towards the medial side, because you're a lot closer to where the vessels are. They're lying directly behind the clavicle. Delayed operations. you've got more callus, you've got more stuff being stuck down, so there is a higher risk. So when you're getting from sort of beyond that 2-3 week mark, I mean, how many of you work in clinics where you bring someone back with a clavicle fracture at 4 weeks to see how they're getting on, and you make a 4-week decision about it? Nobody's nodding, everybody's shaking their heads. No, 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 no. When I started at Swindon, everybody seemed to come back at 4 weeks and get referred to me for a clavicle fixation. They're not better. Well, it's because you haven't waited 6 or 8. So make a decision early. If you're not operating on a clavicle, make a decision in week 1 to 2 when it's a lot easier to fix, and hopefully you can get to stage at a decent time. And there's a higher potential rate of vascular injury with the malunions. Precautions. There was this paper that was around the time I did the exam 8 years ago, which talks about the different zones, and we talked about this in the anatomy session at the beginning of last term. But basically, there's the zones of what's safe. So the most dangerous part of the clavicle is the medial, followed by the middle, followed by the lateral. Arm abducted. Anyone ever thought about where they position the arm when they're doing clavicle? So if you bring the arm into the side, it brings the vessels down. If you put the arm out to the side, it brings the vessels up underneath the clavicle. So just something to think about. I don't know if anyone's ever moving the arm like that. I tend to just square off the clavicle and operate on that. End-tidal PCO2, if you do go through it, it's normally the vein that gets got, and I tend to operate on clavicles flat, so that if I do put a hole in anything, that they don't suck in some air, because they get air entrained, and then their end-tidal PCO2 drops, and that's a bad sign. So yeah, those are the kind of safety precautions. The thing that I generally get guys to do is you drill through the first cortex, and when you drill through the second, you get double-handed with one hand resting on the patient. Does that make sense? So you drill your first cortex, you've got your guide, you drill the first cortex. As soon as you're through the one cortex, you then put your hand on the patient and your hand on the other side, and you basically act as your own drill stop. And when you measure, you can actually go into the vein with the end of the guide. So measure to 20 and then put it in. So you're not plunging all the way to 30 or 50. Before you pull back and grab whatever's there, skewer it. Anyway. Okay. So this is just a CT angio, just showing how close the vessels are directly behind the clavicle. Okay, so who do you therefore you actually operate on? So there are kind of absolute indications and relative indications. So if you've got open fracture, or the skin is clearly tethered and threatened, starting to get necrotic, then that's a relative indication for good indication for getting on. If you've got someone who's got a vascular injury, in polytrauma patients, often they will cope better. If you've got the ones with rib fractures, scapular fractures, etc., then actually it can help to get the shoulder girdle back out to a more normal position. And that's where the superior shoulder suspensory complex comes in. And those with a brachial plexus injury, you may well contemplate that one. To be fair, if they've got a dense plexus injury, then you're probably going to send them to plexus surgeons, and they'll use the clavicle fracture as a way to get into the plexus to restore it. Or you can plate it, and then they can take that off and replate it later. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so these are the studies. These are the important ones. So it was the COT study that really, so the Canadian Orthopaedic Trauma Society study in 2007, that really started to clarify who we should operate on. And in the UK, that was when we started getting this big rise in the number of people we were operating on. So they said that if it was displaced by more than 2 centimetres, then that's the group who tend to go to non-unions, and that's the group that we should specifically be focusing on. The paper that you guys got sent out with Packer, Chesser, Crowder, etc. on it, found pretty much the same results. So if you randomise people to having an operation or not having an operation, then your rates of union improved if you operated on them. But if you looked at the group who went on to unite versus the ones who had a fixation, the functional outcome, if you united, basically they said the functional outcome was pretty much the same. So their number needed to treat was about 6.5. So in other words, to prevent one non-union, you need to operate on 6 patients. Does that make sense? And so they drew the conclusion that it wasn't cost effective to be operating on these guys, and we should be waiting for non-union surgery, which was a very different conclusion the Canadians took. They said it's displaced, it's a risk of non-union, therefore you should get on and operate on it. And this is kind of where the whole tension about whether you should operate on them or not operate on them comes from, pretty much. What are you guys seeing around the region? Are you operating on most of these? There's a few interventional surgeons around the place, I think. Yeah, wide variation in fact. So, is it obvious to you who gets an operation and who doesn't? Yeah? James feels it pretty clear.
Yeah, I think there is big streams, but there's a group in the middle where actually there's a lot of people.
All a bit grey. Okay. So, sorry. So, this is how I posit it. You've got those absolute indications, but really, who do I actually discuss an operation with? So I guess that's the emphasis, is that we've now got this equipoise in the literature, so you don't have to operate on everybody. So I will offer operation to a certain group of people. And so the people I offer operation to are those who are in that at-risk group and who are wanting to kind of consider the surgery. So I've put 18 to 60, all the studies were done in that age group. Over 60, you start to deal with carotid bone, your complication rate goes up, the non-union rate may go up as well, comorbidities, etc. tend to go up. So I would have to be persuaded to be offering surgery to someone in the older age group. I don't think that in an ageist way, it's just I think you need to kind of pick winners with this. Self-employed or manual, if you've got someone in front of you who's a plasterer or who's a builder, and you say to them, look, you're at risk, you're in an at-risk category of getting non-union. You've probably got a 1 in 4 chance of not being knitted by 6 months, and maybe a sort of 1 in 5, 1 in 6 chance of not being knitted at 1 year. Then I kind of leave it up to them as to whether or not they want to have an operation. So I do offer a surgery to them, because if they are out of work for that period of time, if they're that unlucky, kind of 20% or 17%, they're going to lose their job. So I do offer surgery to those guys. If I've got an accountant sitting in front of me who's not going to lose their job, but they may knock their best time on Strava, maybe not by it. Okay, that I'm less bothered by. So I will offer surgery to people who I think potentially are going to get any economic benefit from it, and who are in the at-risk group. And I just basically counsel them. These are your risks. What do you want to do? There was some soft evidence, I think it's from the London Classical trial, that if you're getting comfortable by about 2 weeks, that's a good sign that you're going to be in a lower risk group for non-union. So, do any of you heard of that before? I think some of the guys here use that. So I generally will see people at the 2-week mark to make a decision with them as to whether or not they want to go ahead. If they're not getting comfortable, they're still really sore. If they fall in the kind of category, I'll discuss the option of an operation with them, but I don't try to persuade them to have the operation. Does that make sense? Is that kind of what you're seeing reflected around region at the moment? Right, case-based discussion time. So what I want you guys to do is have a think about this, and have a think about what you personally would do with it. Go to chat out. So this is about weighing up. What do you know about the fracture? What do you know about the patient? What's going to work in your hands? Have a think about the things that are going to worry you. So, what's going to happen if you do something? What's going to happen if you don't do something? I think it's probably a fair game exam question. So she comes to your clinic in 9 days, she's like this. Who's next up for the exam? Horrible question. It's the go. Yeah. Put one tape down here. Yeah.
There's loads of stuff around. There's a lot of other stuff around.
Okay, so who wants to have fun to this? What are you going to do with this?
She's a poor surgical candidate, but she's pending engagement fracture.
Yeah.
So I'd still try not to operate. That's going to involve some engagement fracture.
And I guess the question is, so what operation would you do here?
You could actually try and change the configuration of that with just using some sort of splint or sling bolts to rest in our book. That's least likely to kill it.
He says a sling. Do you agree? Andy, you were saying you've been on 210.
The issues are, like Mark said, you've got a poor surgical candidate, but essentially open. Your options are surgically, you could treat it as a soft tissue injury with a button and put it down. You could do a hook plate, but then you'd probably lead towards 2 operations.
What's your poison? If you're choosing that option, what's your poison? What are you risking? Because as soon as you decide a path, you're suddenly laying yourself open to the complications associated with that path. So if you put in a hook plate, for instance, in a 76-year-old lady, so she may fracture the acromion.
You may get medial.
So you may end up with the same picture, but with the hook pointing out the skin. Yeah, or you may fracture on medial side. Yeah. If you do a coracoid fixation,
You may pull the coracoid up.
you may pull the coracoid off. James is indicating
Can
like
you do
this.
it?
It's like a karate chop move. So what are you going to do?
If she's really rough, you can just take the end of the padlock.
Okay.
Or the end of the
So everything you've just discussed is exactly what went through my mind when I met this lady. I thought, bloody hell, what do I do about it? I thought, well, okay, so what are we looking at? What's the end point here? If this comes out through the skin, what are we going to be doing? Excising it. What is the only option I can think of that I could do for this? Excising it. So, was I working with you when I had this lady?
No.
Okay, so I put her in a better sling and told her family, if it comes out the skin, give me a call and bring her back. Anyway, so she, my IT stuff, it was too good to be true, wasn't it? It was working too well. Yeah, 6 weeks. Anyway, so I left her. And actually, I ended up seeing her 3 months into it. Anyway, it was fine. Basically, she was sitting there comfortably, the skin was moving freely over it. It wasn't actually tethered. Anyway, so I got away with it. But so it's the kind of, you've got to justify what you do with these. Okay, it's the kind of rationale of what you do. Okay, very quickly, scapular fractures. I was going to do a coffee break after this. Does that kind of seem around about the right time? Wilting. So scapular fractures. Who knows what this classification is? Heidelberg classification. Okay, you do not need to know this classification. You just need to know, is it an intra-articular or is it an extra-articular fracture? Okay, that's pretty much all you need to know about scapular fractures. Along with, is the glenohumeral joint in joint or is it subluxed? Because that's really what's going to govern whether or not you intervene in broad terms. The next slide is going to show you a whole bunch of parameters how bad the clavicle fracture is also judged. So you've got these Heidelberg classification, and you just need to be aware of what it is. You don't need to know the subtypes of it. And you purposefully cannot read that, okay? Because I just want to run through these. The one that's important is the glenopolar angle, and I've got a slide to explain that. But they talk about how much lateralization there is, or the lateralized offset. So in other words, when the glenoid and the blade start overlapping, what the glenopolar angle is, the angulation of the blade on the lateral view, the combined displacements of both the glenopolar angle and the angulation, and then the double disruptions, thinking about when you've got a clavicle fracture involved. That's all the stuff that scapular surgeons get very excited about. Glenopolar angle is probably the one that you just need to have an awareness of, that we measure it, okay? And that's how you measure it. So weirdly, it's from the inferior part of the scapula right up to the top of the glenoid and then down. And you ideally make a comparison to the other side. Traditionally, it's done on X-ray views, but the X-ray views can vary up to 6 degrees depending on what angle you've obtained them at. So increasingly, you can start to do it on CT recons, but that wasn't originally how it was described. So hot off the press, and I was with at least one of you in Vancouver for this. So this was back at the end of 2017, Orthopedic Trauma Association. This is from the mini symposium on scapular fractures. Okay, so this is about as up to date as it gets. We'll give it 18 months ago. This was the conclusion from Paul Tormenta, who's one of those people who loves, this is an American who likes operating on scapular fractures, right? This is a man who's looking for work to suck the money out of every patient he gets. And he has concluded that there's no great data regarding intervention on scapular fractures. Most of them do well without an operation. That was from an American. I mean, that was the one time at the OTA I heard that. Outcome is related to glenopolar angle. So there's good evidence that if you have a very aberrant glenopolar angle, really it's talking about how medialized the glenoid is. That's a bad sign. And the indications, I'm sorry, I thought this is taken from my notes on the day. Instability is an indication of potential intervention and severe displacement, whatever that is. Okay. So, Jen, how many of you have actually done a scapular ORIC? Or have you been involved in one? Yeah, was that here?
No, it was Gloucester.
Oh, right. Was that Chris Coe? Oh, did he go there? Danny go. Cool. And was that here with Mike Kelly?
No, it's using illustration.
Okay, right. I've done 3, I think. And I did 2 of them with Mike Kelly. And they're really good fun. And they're quite challenging to do. But you end up operating on the easy ones, which is probably ones you don't need to operate on. So, operative indications. Be the polar angle with less than 10 degrees, discrepancy compared to the other side. It's angulated more than 45, displacement, etc. Really, the key thing here is if you've got a scapular fracture and you've got a clavicle fracture, that's called a floating shoulder. And normally, what you do is start off by fixing the clavicle. There was a thought at one point that it improved all the scapular morphology, but it actually probably doesn't. But what it does do is it helps you ventilate when you've got rib fractures associated with a bad scapular fracture and everything else. So it probably is worth fixing the clavicle. Yeah, there we are, rib fractures mentioned. And the conclusions are scapulo-thoracic dissociations. Actually, don't worry about the conclusions too much. It's really the scapulo-thoracic dissociation bit. If you get someone in an MTC with this kind of injury who's had almost like a 4-quarter amputation, they've got that very sublux looking scapula, check their CKs, because they've often had dead muscle brewing in the area. That was something I didn't know before this symposium. So I just add that. So CK is something worth considering. You look very knowledgeable at the meeting and say, I think we should check CK on this patient. What are you doing? Cool. So I think that's all you need to know about scapular fractures. Basically, vast majority of them don't need an operation. The key elements of it are really instability and very severe displacement, in which case we can phone you friends and have a chat about it. Has anyone got questions about that? Because clavicles is really the important bit. It's a really common injury. You see it all the time. And yet it's quite conflicting about who you operate on and what the evidence is. Right. What time should we meet?
15 minutes.
15 minutes? Yeah. Okay, so back at 22. Yeah.
Was another room.